Hello, welcome to Revive and Rise. I'm your host, Melody Parrish, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I do apologize for the delay of this episode. I am just getting my voice back, so there may be pauses, times where I clear my throat, or times where I stop to have a sip of hot tea, and I do apologize for that. But I thought it would just add to the discussion today. And what we're discussing today is toxic relationships. Toxic relationships and the reasons that we go back. And if we think about toxic relationships, there are so many varieties, and they can be from so many different people, any relationship that's in our lives. So they can be familial, as in between parents and children, between siblings. They can be romantic relationships. They can also be employer-employee relationships. They can be coworkers. They can be friends. They can be colleagues. They can be a variety of relationships that we have in our lives. And some of the main toxic relationships that we have, let me explain them. You can have controlling relationships where one person exerts excessive control over the others. And this can be control of actions, control of decisions, control of social interactions. So you'll see people one isolating the other, or one maybe limiting what the other one can do. But one person in the relationship is always in control. You have manipulative relationships, and we'll be talking more about manipulation in the next few months. But when in manipulative relationships, you have one person that uses guilt, uses lying, uses deceit to get what they want. And they may twist facts, they may use gaslighting, and they may even make the other person doubt their reality. But manipulative relationships can be very detrimental. Not that the other toxic relationships are not detrimental, but manipulation can be a very detrimental characteristic and something that's used to control others. Many of these relationships come hand in hand with each other. Like, you'll have narcissistic relationships, but they're also manipulative and controlling. So there's many different ones. All of these can lead to codependent relationships. So these all are intertwined. But these are just some characteristics of toxicity. Another one is narcissistic relationships, which we'll be talking about next month. And it's where one person lacks empathy. They have a sense of self-centeredness and a constant need for admiration. They're often devaluing the other person or making them feel less significant in some form or fashion. When you have codependent relationships, they're an unhealthy imbalance of the two individuals. And they also have a dynamic that one person is excessively reliant on the other one. And it often goes to the extent of suppressing their own needs to please the other person in the relationship. And then you have emotionally and verbally abusive relationships where there's frequent yelling, blaming, or belittling, all of these things destroy, they're from one person and destroying the other person's self-esteem. And these are also followed by, well, because you're this way, because you have these problems, then you need to be thankful that I am here, either to love you, to take care of you, to be with you. It's that kind of relationship. You also have neglectful relationships where one person does not give the other one care, affection, attention, and this lack results in feelings of isolation and abandonment and loneliness. Neglectful relationships, especially early in childhood, can have detrimental effects throughout the person's life. You have on-again, off-again relationships that are characterized by instability and that have dramatic breaks and dramatic reconciliation. And doing this from one person doing this to another person, it destroys their self-confidence. It destroys their personalities. It destroys the person. And then you have enabler relationships. And this kind of goes along with other relationships. This is more of the victim part of the relationship. It's a very destructive behavior, but it's making excuses for the other person. It's saying, well, this is because of that. This action is because of that. And in a way, it's making the negative action okay. Or it's saying, well, that's just that person. That's just them. It's okay. That's just the way they act. It's okay. When really it's not okay. Another relationship that we don't think about too much, or I really didn't think about this as toxic until I started researching the toxic relationships for this episode, but stagnant relationships, when the relationship brings more unhappiness than it does joy, and the individuals in these relationships feel stuck. They don't feel like they can leave. They don't feel like there's better. And those characteristics tend to go with all of the toxic relationships. And I feel like when we say stagnant relationships, we are kind of, in a way, talking about all of these and encompassing all of these relationships that I just spoke of. Because when we talk about stagnant relationships, the toxic relationship becomes stagnant, and it's a long-term pattern. And most of the time, the relationship will eventually bring more unhappiness than it brings joy. And we get stuck in it. We get stuck in the idea that we are not worthy of better, that there is no better, that we cannot do better, that we don't deserve better. And those kind of things, they come from the long-term patterns of these relationships. So it's kind of like the longer the toxicity lasts, the more stagnant the relationship becomes. And a lot of times when we talk about toxic relationships, it's not always toxic at first. It may be wonderful. It may be great. When we're talking about romantic relationships, you may be so in love and doing so many great things together and all of these things, but eventually it turns dark. Eventually things arise that are just negative. And when we're thinking of parent-child relationships, the child's dependent on the parent for most everything in their lives. And when at first the child is just learning, so they don't realize that what the parent's doing is toxic, what the parent's doing is wrong. And so when we're talking about maybe employee-employer, that's a lot more of the manipulative, I feel like, emotional abuse, narcissistic. And so all of these different all of these different relationships in our lives have different effects on us. And when we're talking about going back and the ideas, we always say, well, why do they keep going back? Especially in a physically abusive relationship, we're like, well, that wife or that husband or that person that's being physically abused, they tend to go back. They always go back to their abuser, and we just don't understand. Or maybe it's a child that always goes back to the parent, a grown child, an adult child that always goes back to the parent and is always abused continually. And when we're talking about these things, we need to, and the reasons that we return to these things, we need to think about childhood. And so many things stem from our childhood, and that's where they begin, and that's where we're taught. And when we look at childhood, from the ages of 3 and 4, that's when children start to develop complex thoughts of emotions and complex ideas. And that's where children learn about love, learn about hate, learn about those different emotions and those different things, what feels like love and what feels like hate. Because that's when children start to say, I love you, or I don't like you. That's when children start to give hugs, start to say things like, oh, you're my best friend, things like that. So that starts in the ages of about 3 to 4 years. And then once you get to the ages of 6 to 11 years, that's when those complex thoughts grow and they get more complex, and children are learning emotions. They're learning how to handle their emotions, how to regulate their emotions. They're learning what love is. They're learning what hate is. They're learning what all of these different things are, and they're understanding it. So if a child between the ages of 6 and 11 see mommy and daddy in a domestic violence relationship, they're going to associate that and think that it's okay. They're going to think that those kind of things mean love. If a child between 6 and 11 is in a physical is being physically abused or sexually abused by a parent or a trusted adult, then they're going to think that that's how that adult expresses love, because that adult that they trust is supposed to love them. Therefore, they associate the two. Love equals physical abuse. Love equals sexual abuse. And when you get these ideas as a child, they develop into adulthood. And when that's all you know, then that's all that you understand. That's what you see. And research shows that the human mind goes back to the familiar. Because even though the familiar may be negative, the familiar brings comfort because the person knows what's going to happen and knows what to do. And they understand that. Even in all of the chaos, especially if there's chaos and change going on in the person's life, maybe there's some type of life-changing change, like maybe there's a move, a change of employment, a death in the family, those types of things. Well, guess what? When those types of drastic changes happen in someone's life, the thing that brings comfort is something that's familiar, something that can be determined, something that we know, something that's concrete. And so that's why people tend to return back to these toxic relationships, because that's all they know. And when I think about, I'll give a personal example. So when I was younger, I was told by a trusted individual that I thought loved me. I was told that the more angry that person got and the meaner that person was to me and the more negative that person was to me, that meant they loved me more. And that meant they loved me more because they felt that they could be themselves around me. And they only were themselves around people that they loved very much. And I totally believe that. And I believe that into my adulthood. And when I look back at it, I feel like that changed, and that caused me to develop a lot of the relationships that I had. That perception and seeing things through that light and that idea. It wasn't till a lot later in life when I was able to see and understand that that is not true. If somebody is negative to you and exhibits negative behavior to you, that is not love. Let me just say that. If someone is belittling you, if someone is constantly angry at you, if someone's manipulating you, if someone's making you feel guilt or shame to control you, if someone's physically or sexually abusing you, that is not love. To me, now that I'm in my adult life, love does not promote negative things. If you feel any negative emotions, I don't feel like that's love. Love brings you joy. Love brings you comfort. Love brings you this feeling of being alive. Love brings you an awakening. Love brings you strength. Love brings you resilience. Love brings you every positive emotion possible because love is positivity. So if you have anything in your life, any relationship in your life that is harming you in any way, that is not love. And I feel like people need to understand that because I didn't understand that for a long, long, long time. And that went back to my childhood. And because of that, I developed a skewed way of interpreting the world and interpreting those around me. And I feel like that happens to a lot of people. I feel like a lot of people experience that. And these ideas, maybe we're taught that, maybe we're told that, but maybe we witness it, maybe we see that. There's so many different ways this happens. But when we grow up and that's a learned behavior, that's what we see. And that's all that we understand and the way that we look at the world. And an example I want to share with you about, when I saw this this documentary, I immediately thought of a toxic relationship. And the documentary was about Chernobyl, and Chernobyl is a nuclear power plant that was in Ukraine, and in the 80s, one of the nuclear reactors exploded. And it was interesting because the surrounding community had no idea about nuclear waste, had no idea about nuclear fallout. And so when this explosion happened, it released nuclear particles within the area and within the air. And these glowing particles made the community come out and see it and witness the explosion. They played in these nuclear particles, this nuclear residue, because they didn't understand. And so later in life, they experienced radioactive poisoning. They experienced cancer, high levels of cancer, and organ failure from their exposure. But they didn't know, they didn't understand. These people were walking over extremely radioactive materials. They were handling extremely radioactive materials that immediately melted off their skin for some of them, and that had long-lasting effects for others. And that's how I feel like a toxic relationship can be. If you don't have all of the information, if you don't fully understand, if you're not able to sense the toxicity in people, if you're constantly making excuses, oh, that's that person, that's just the way they are. Yeah, well, maybe that may be, but that may be toxic behavior that they're exhibiting. And maybe you need to avoid that behavior. Another thing that I'll talk about Chernobyl is the way that the government manipulated the facts, and the way that manipulation, the way that control, the way that all of that was affected, and those that that one incident is an example of all of these things, of manipulation, of emotional control, or of emotional abuse, of narcissistic characteristics, of all of these things, because the government and the leaders and the people that were surrounding this incident exhibited all of these things. And we'll talk more about those later in later episodes. Another example is I know that I have referenced the book Cold Crematorium by Joseph Depredny and several times on this podcast. It is such a good book. It's dark and it's very hard to read, but it's a good book if you're wanting to explore the emotions and the horrific nature of the Holocaust. And I feel like it's very important for these people that lived this horror to be able to express themselves and tell individuals about it. It's very it's very important for their validation. But in it, Joseph, who was liberated from Dornau, the Dornau concentration camp, which was part of the Rosgrossen concentration camps. They the prisoners, they were there overnight. Liberation had already happened. They didn't realize it, and the next day, they realized that they had been in the concentration camp overnight, and the doors were not even locked. So they had been a free people, a free group, for almost 24 hours before they realized that they had their freedom. And that's something that I feel like is very common in toxic relationships. Sometimes we don't understand and we don't comprehend that freedom is there if we'll just walk through. That door to freedom is there if we'll just walk through. And and sometimes we need help. Sometimes we need to talk to therapists. Sometimes we need to talk to friends, to people that we trust, that we have confidence in, and we need to talk to them, get their perspective, and come out of, I would say, come out of the fog that's in our head, the fog that clouds our judgment, to just get a different perspective and look maybe from the outside into what's going on. And I feel like we need that sometimes to understand that we do have the opportunity for freedom from the toxicity in our life, because we don't realize and we don't understand that the toxicity is there. And just like me, you may need to fully understand emotions and go back and learn what different emotions are, what characteristics different emotions exhibit. Maybe you have something in childhood that distorted your idea or distorted your belief system. But I invite you to try to sit with yourself, to think about the different relationships you have in your life, and to really analyze them. Because this is important. We need to become familiar with things in our lives. We need to become familiar with ourselves. And we need to think of these things analytically. And the reason I say that is because over the last couple years, I have really learned that and developed that idea of just sitting with things, even if it's hard emotions, and just helping yourself to realize and to understand. Because until you point out and recognize that toxicity, you're not able to do anything about it because you don't know it's there. You can't solve a problem that you don't know. If you don't know something is a problem or something is causing a problem, then you don't know. If you don't know, then you can't fix it. And sometimes it just happens. Sometimes it happens because you're analyzing and you're looking for different things, but sometimes it also happens just out of the blue. One day I was talking to a friend and I just told them about that idea that I had of love and what it meant. And they told me, "Oh, that's just not true. That's crazy." Da 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 da. And so, then I started thinking, I started exploring, I started researching and looking and analyzing, and then I learned, oh, well, that was a negative belief that led to a negative belief system, which highly impacted my life. And I need to correct that negative belief system. But before that, I had no idea that it was negative. And so that's what I'm talking about. Sitting with yourself and just being prepared to do the work. Being prepared to analyze and being prepared to possibly be uncomfortable. I mean, maybe you'll analyze all the relationships in your life, and maybe it'll be okay. Maybe all of them are loving and nurturing and bring you comfort and bring you joy. And that's great. That is fantastic. But it's important to also notice when that's not true. To notice when that's not true and to be able to do something about it. And that's what's difficult, right? Because sitting with that negativity, sitting with those negative emotions, and I know that realization is hard. And for a long time, I was so hard on myself for believing that and for believing that negative belief. And when it happens, when you recognize it, you're going to be hard on yourself. But I suggest and I ask you and encourage you to give yourself grace. Give yourself grace because you didn't know any better. And that's okay because now you do. And now you can do something about it. And so I want to thank you for joining us today. And I hope that I said something that will help you in the future. I hope that I said something that will cause you to explore things in your world, explore ideas, explore relationships, explore people in your life, in your world. And I just want to to remind you that you do not have to suffer alone. So go to my Substack. You can go to my Substack. You can look what I write. You can leave me a message. You can listen to other episodes of Revive and Rise. I would love to hear from you. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.